To begin, let's consider a curious pattern. Think of the best places in the world for watching whales, and the chances are good that there's some cool geology nearby. For example, the best place in the United States to see humpback whales is from the northern tip of New England's Cape Cod. Look underwater and you will see why. A massive, isolated plateau, known as Stellwagen Bank, sculpted from the seafloor by the glaciers and meltwater erosion from the Pleistocene Ice Age. Another example, one of the best places in the world to see sperm whales is off the coast of New Zealand's South Island, near a town called Kaikoura. It turns out that Kaikoura lies atop the massive triple fault system that cradles the country, and a transverse fault along it brings a mile-deep canyon right up to Kaikoura's beach. Another example, the world's river dolphins all live high upstream in the fluvial outflows of the Earth's largest mountain chains. The Amazonian drainage of the Andes, the Indian and Pakistani rivers fed by the Himalayas, and the Chinese drainages of that same orogeny. Or, work the other way. Think of any geologic anomaly in the world's oceans, and you can bet there is a population of whales in close proximity. Look to the areas of the world where geologic processes are at their most dynamic and ostentatious. The subduction zones of tectonic plate boundaries, the arcs and seamounts of active volcanoes, or the zones of recent or ongoing glaciation. In all these geologic palimpsests, whales are there, lurking. Look at all this geology. Then look at the world's premier research localities for blue whales, the large blue dots. The connection becomes obvious. Wherever the blue whales are at large, close at hand is a glacier, or a trench, or a volcano. Again, the humpback serves as a prime example. Each year, all over the world, humpback whales migrate remarkable distances between geologic anomalies. In the abundance of the summer, when it's time to feed, they are attending the geologic marvels of the higher latitudes, the fjords, ice sheets, and steep-walled subduction zones, shown in gray. In the sterility of winter, they make for their tropical breeding grounds among the volcanoes and seamounts, from geologic monument to geologic monument, and back again. Of all these geologic clues of where to find whales, the most promising is certainly the world's fjord systems. They are known for being some of the most majestic, breathtaking places on Earth. And even within these breathtaking glacial troughs, here too you will find whales, often in surprising numbers. It is a geoleviathanic phenomenon. It is our focus here today. Yes, there is a strange kinship between rock and whale. Of course, you could argue that the same goes for anything, that geology is the literal bedrock of all life, the groundwork for all natural history, be it whale, person, plant, or bacteria. And there is some truth to that. Ecologically speaking, the connection between rocks and whales is not exactly direct. There are several tiers of intermediate steps. I will explain this using fjords as an example. We'll begin with the geological process that formed them, then see what it takes to work up to whales. Fjords are long, narrow, high-walled inlets that are formed when a glacier cuts a U-shaped valley into the bedrock. They can be as much as a mile deep, as much as 60 miles in length. There are many ways to make a fjord, but in a typical scenario, a glacier plows a deep, U-shaped valley into coastal bedrock and advances into the sea. Here is a cross-section of coastal bedrock before glaciation has occurred. The blue line is sea level. To the right is the topography of dry land. In the middle, the shallow seas of the continental shelf. On the left, the seafloor falls away down the abyssal continental slope. So, Fjord Formation. Here we go. Here comes the glacier, flowing down the path of least resistance toward the open ocean. As it advances, it plows away the bedrock underneath itself, cutting out a valley. Once it hits the shore, given enough thickness and mass, the glacier will continue cutting into the seafloor. As it does, the salt water begins to melt the glacier's leading edge. Nevertheless, she plows on. But as melting reduces its size, the tongue of the glacier starts to float, where the glacier finally lifts off the bottom, which is where the plowing stopped and the glacier's terminal moraine is piled high. A steep ridge is formed. This ridge is the beginning of a sill. As the floating glacier continues to melt, it drops debris that hitherto had been encased in the ice along its belly, a melting process called ablation. This drop stone debris amplifies the sill. As glaciers and ice sheets all over the world melted due to global warming, dumping their pent-up water back into the sea levels rose. The swiftly rising waters flood the coastal glacial valleys, creating the fjords we know today. But other forces continue to shape their bathymetries. Over time, sediment is pushed up against the outer side of the sill, deposited from passing oceanic currents, and also on the interior side, carried into the fjord from rivers and tributary fjords. Mixing currents, which I will explain in a moment, further gouge out the fjord floor and increase the height of the sill. This process is called over-deepening. This risen sill plays a major role in the next step from geology to whales: submarine currents. The water in a fjord tends to sort into layers of different densities, which is determined by its temperature and the amount of salt it contains. At the head of the fjord, where fresh waters enter, a superficial layer forms. Below that, ocean water of the lowest salinity and highest temperature congregates. Below that is the layer of densest salt water, and, all things being equal, a steady density discontinuity forms between these two layers, called an isohaline line. But of course, all things are not equal. As water is pushed in and pulled out of the fjord from all directions, this pretty picture turns messy. Remember that there is a constant flow of freshwater from the mainland. This imposes itself on the low salinity layer below, creating a swirling subsurface zone of turbulence. And then there are the oceanic tides. In a process called tidal pumping, high-density water is pushed over the sill and into the fjord, sinking below the isohaline line. Just as waves form between the fluid layers of sea and air, waves also form between the different density layers as they are clashed together. This is a process called entrainment. On the ebb tide, the low-density water at the surface is sucked out of the fjord over the sill, which pulls high-density water toward the surface deep within the fjord. This mixes with the freshwater outflow and recharges the low-density layer. This tidal engine creates a constant opposition of landwards and seawards flow, a dynamism referred to as estuarine circulation, because technically, fjords are just grandiose estuaries. During all this mixing, a layer of the highest density water, sometimes a mile deep, lies untouched below the chaos. This water stagnates in the deepest areas of the fjord, creating an anoxic, abyssal environment. As you can see, the sill creates a bottleneck where the tides must enter the fjord. Like placing a glacial thumb over the tidal hose, the sill forces tides to rush and topple in and out. The coerced mixing of different water salinities induces massive eddies. This also creates massive surface currents that create massive, chaotic surface waves, a dangerous fjord phenomenon known as skookumchuck, a trading term that translates euphemistically to strong waters. It gets messier still. Tidal flux in the long, narrow, steep-walled channels of fjords are particularly huge. For instance, under a full moon, the tidal range at the study site in British Columbia was over 25 feet. All of this is complicated enough, even within a simple diagram of a single fjord, but of course, in real life, it is much more foreboding. All of this mixing is compounded when dozens of fjords are juxtaposed next to each other, as is the case in New Zealand, whose entire southwest corner is an endless fjordland, or on Norway's coast, or in Iceland's western half. These erratic coastlines are very high in surface area. British Columbia's fjorded coast, for instance, is about 16,000 miles long. All these furrows and crannies disrupt passing ocean currents, slowing them down and swirling them into large eddies. And so, all these fancy terms and processes, ablation, sill formation, over-deepening, outflow, turbulence, tidal pumping, entrainment, estuarine circulation, skookumchuck, huge tidal flux, they all iterate and accumulate over the course of millennia to mean one thing: nutrient mixing. These areas of mixed, concentrated nutrients attract diatoms and phytoplankton, causing massive blooms throughout the fjord system. This is the primary productivity in Chile's fjords. On the left is a close-up of the study site in Chile. The colors correspond to surface chlorophyll content, which indicates phytoplankton presence. The red end of the spectrum is highest productivity, and the blue and violet end is the lowest. And here is a productivity of all the world's oceans. The overall pattern is clear. Low productivity in the tropics and subtropics, and higher productivity in the higher latitudes. And in all the fjorded coasts of the world, the productivity spikes into the red. So, these productivity blooms are the foundations of the marine food webs. Zooplankton and small fish thrive on it, and whales, among others, thrive on them. So now we have the ecological roadmap of the geology of whales. From geologic hotspots, to productivity hotspots, to whale hotspots, exemplified by a classic fjord scenario. But even this is too neat, because there are constant changes, brought about by climate and seasons, adding another level of dynamism. Here comes a time-lapse of productivity shifts in the Chilean study site. The graph on the left corresponds to the images, a constantly shifting foodscape. Finally, nutrient mixing becomes really wacky when fjords crosshatch, convolute, bisect, and act as tributaries for each other, relics of a thorough and chaotic glacial past. These regions are known as scary arrays. Not surprisingly, they are home to the world's most productive waters, and as a result, the world's most amazing whales. One of our case studies today can be found in the scary array that stretches 500 miles from Tierra del Fuego up into Chilean Patagonia. Here I spent the last few months researching blue whales. The other scary array is that of the Northwest's Inside Passage, stretching from Seattle, Washington to Skagway, Alaska. There I spent last summer working with humpbacks and orcas from a remote outcamp. Two scary worlds, both teeming with scary whales. Orcas, humpbacks, blue whales. These three species are iconic representatives of whales and dolphins, those marine mammals that comprise the order Cetacea. This is their family tree turned sideways. As you can see, it has a major division, two main suborders splitting the Cetacea down the middle. There are the toothed whales, the odontocetes, and the baleen whales, the mysticetes. The blue and humpback whales are mysticetes. They belong to the suborder's largest family, the rorqual whales. Blue whales and humpbacks are very closely related and technically fall within the same genus, but humpbacks are so odd-looking that it has kept its pre-Darwinian maiden name of Megaptera. In the other suborder of cetaceans, the odontocetes, we will find the orca, or killer whale. Strictly speaking, it is a dolphin, the largest species of the family Delphinidae. But it grows so large that it is typically referred to as a whale. A male orca, which can weigh over 6 tons and be 30 feet long, has a dorsal fin as tall as me.